Dato, and a very good afternoon to everyone.
Yes, I can see.
Um, Welcome to the PAM DLS series. And today we have one of the icons of Malaysian architecture with us, Dato Architect Dr. Ken Yeang. And we are to talk about today about designing for the future of the planet based on science of ecology. And I think the climate crisis of climate change is something that is on the mind of everyone on the planet. Only have one planet, and designers and architects being at the forefront of the global issue of climate change. We are change makers, and amongst them, we have Dato Ken Yeang, who is seen as the father of the modern skyscraper. Although he needs no introduction, let me read a little bit of his CV for your perusal. Ken is an architect, a member of PAM since 1972, and also an ecologist belonging to the British Ecology Society. What makes his work compelling is its authentic, signature, ecology-based design. What makes his work relevant and current is that it seeks to make both people and nature thrive. Aesthetically, the
So,
work has a signature and distinctive signature green verdant aesthetic that performs beyond conventional green rating systems and that seeks at the same time to make its users and people happy. He is an early pioneer in this field since 1971, where the work advances the principles and systems in sustainable design. He has written over 12 authoritative books on the topic. He trained at the Architectural Association School in the UK, received his doctorate from Cambridge University on ecological design. His key buildings include Putrajaya 2C5 at Precinct 2, which received the PAM Award and GBI Silver, Solaris in Singapore, which is a Green Mark Platinum building, the Menara Mesianiaga received the Aga Khan Award, the Genome Research Building in Hong Kong, the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital Extension in the UK, receiving BREEAM Excellent, the National Library in Singapore, which is rated Green Mark Platinum. He has been awarded PAM Gold Medal, the Merdeka Award from the Government of Malaysia, the Liangshan International Award from the Architectural Society of China, the Gold Medal from the Association of Siamese Architects, the Prince Claus Award from the Netherlands. He has served as past president of PAM. He is an honorary fellow of the Wolfson College, Cambridge, and an honorary fellow of the American Institute of Architects, FAIA, the distinguished Plim professor at Illinois University. The UK's Guardian newspaper named him one of the 50 individuals who could save the planet, and rightly so. Thank you. We are so honored to have you. Without further ado, I think the people here all come to listen to you talk. So I would just pass over the floor to you, sir.
okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming to listen to me talk. Some of you may have heard this before, so please drop off and go to sleep anytime. Now, as you know, I've been working on ecological design. Okay, well, this is the summary of the way I do my work. I start with defining objectives, which is to design for a resilient planet. Then I do research work. The research is interpreted by design, which is the design interpretation. And then where possible, I test my ideas in build projects as prototypes. Then I've summarized them and I evaluate and I publish them in books. So that is the cyclic process. And then from there, I do further research and design interpretation again. Now, I see green design as the biointegration of 5 factors. First one is nature, which is seen as an infrastructure. And the objective is to design with net positive ecology impact. Second is human society, our social, economic, political system, and design for a net happiness society. Next is water, try and design for net zero water without waste of water. Now, water, we have lots of it in the sea, but they're not potable, not drinkable. And so we need to make sure that the water that falls on the ground stays on the ground, and that whatever we use to try and close the loop. Then there's our built environment, which is the infrastructure, the external infrastructure, and that inside the building is also infrastructure, except that inside buildings are hidden. And also this includes everything that we make, which is our buildings, our bridges, our ports, our clothing, our food, and artifacts and things like that. And finally, energy, because we need energy for society. Now, these are the 5 key infrastructures that we need to consider in ecological design. The secret then, the challenge then is biointegration. How do we bring all this together into a whole? And that in a nutshell is what ecological design is about. Nature, our society, our built environment, water, the hydrology, and our energy systems. Now let's look at nature first. Now, ecology sees the Earth as covered by this thin film, which is, you see the blue color there, which is the biosphere. And within the biosphere, there are units in nature, whole units, which are called ecosystems, which consist of communities of plants, animals, and the physical environment. So ecologists call this the abiotic and the abiotic component constituents. And in nature, everything acts together to form a whole. Now, if you look at the room that you're in, or any city, whether it's New York or Tokyo or Singapore or Kuala Lumpur, the biotic constituents are missing, which explains that the functions that nature does for us, sequestering waste, emissions, producing oxygen, is absent from cities. We have little patches of green here and there. In Kuala Lumpur, we have the lake gardens and a bit of the KLCC and so forth. But a good part of Kuala Lumpur has no nature. And so if you're going to design our cities and our buildings as constructed ecosystem, then we need to have equivalent of this in our built environment. And the idea was that if our built environment are constructed as and designed and built as human-made ecosystems, then the biointegration, the less arduous, the less complicated, and that what we need to do then it is much to convert what we have today and try and build a new buildings as constructed ecosystems. Now, obviously, this is easier said than done, and it is actually the principle of what we should try and do. So I start to look at how do we design the built environment as human-made ecosystems. So I start looking at ecosystem attributes, and these are some of them: biological structure, biodiversity, connectivity, nexus, ecosystem service, and so forth. It's a long list, and I've been trying to do as much of this as I can in my research. Now let's look at the first one, which is biological structure, which I discussed earlier on. These are some of the ways we can bring nature back into the city. The first diagram is a centralized one where we put it all in one location, as in Central Park in New York. The second is a spotty, dispersed relationship, has a series of green squares, as in Georgian London, or you can see in the second diagram below, you can have patches of green all over the building. The third is what I call a stepping stone. It's not quite connected, but it is close so that species can move, but not all species from one patch to another. The fourth is the spine, where you have a central spine and fingers sticking out. And the fifth is ecological corridors with fingers. Now, ecologists sees the the last one as the preferred one, because by being connected enables species to move from one part of the of the green areas to the other, so that the whole system becomes an ecological system by being connected. It enables a larger pool of natural resources within this ecosystem to be shared among the species. And the species, by having a larger pool of resources, is more stable. Because as they're more stable, it has a greater potential for survival. So with that as the key diagrams, I started to use it to try and interpret this in my work. So now this is the Solaris building that we completed around 2010. And the idea was to have a continuous spiraling vegetation that goes from the ground in the basement going up to the top of the building. This was a concept perspective I did to show how it could work. Now, if you just put vegetation on the outside, to service the vegetation, you have to go through the floor. So I thought that's no good because people wouldn't like it. And so what I did was provide a ramp next to it so that people can service the vegetation from the outside. Now that's very important because it irritates people no end. Is that, if you have to, that every time you service the vegetation, you have to get permission to go through the floor and you bring the fertilizer, the water and everything else and your tools, go through the window to get to the vegetation. But here you can service the entire vegetation from any part along the ramp. Now, the ramp then becomes for me, if you like, a vertical linear park. And if you extend the ramp horizontally, it's about 1.3 kilometers long, this building. So here it is, it's completed. It took me a year or so to get complete. You can see the vegetation, you can see the ramp, and people servicing, and the sun shading on top. And so the idea was to ramp all the way up the building. So with every floor, with every facade, I could climb one floor with every facade. Goes continuously up to the top of the building. And here it is, certain parts of the building where the ramp is a little bit narrower. And then inside the building, outside the building, it goes up as well. So you can see it going up one floor. And that, as a linear park, I wanted to create places of respite. And so at the corners, I have sky terraces so that people inside can go outside and people in the ramp can actually have like a little mini plaza. And so that these are spaces for interaction. And also it avoids the monotony of a long linear corridor. And so at the corners, you can see here in the red square are these sky courts where the ramp joins the typical floor. And here's another view of the sky court at the corner. And people go for a smoke, could have breakfast, or just to have a meeting, or even just to chat with each other. These are actually very nice spaces for people to use. Well, the right-hand side is a tower where we are working on now in London, where we have sky courts that move, at different parts of the building, alternate, between different parts of the building. And then at the mid-level, we have a park. And this is looking up from the adjoining park opposite on the ground floor. You can see the vegetation climbing up. And this is the mid-level park. And then when you climb to it, and there's another view of the park. And then the top of the building is the big park. And that is where you have a terrific view of the whole One North district in Singapore. Now, Singapore has this thing called the Vegetation Index. And it's a ratio of vegetation you have on the ground area of the site. The requirement is 6, and we achieved 12.2, which is probably the highest in Singapore. And what this means, what this says is that the criteria, whether it's green mark, GBI, or LEED, it's just a criteria which should be based on performance rather than criteria. And we should try and exceed as much as we can. Here we exceeded 6 by 2, almost 2 and a bit more than 6, which is 12.2. Then now the building is actually 2 buildings linked by bridges with an atrium in between. So you can see A and B here, and the atrium in between. And then there's a bridge linking. This is the atrium looking up. And the atrium is naturally vented, is not fully air conditioned. It is not fully naturally ventilated, but it's what I call mixed mode. Some cool air is blown into it. So this reduces the air conditioning load for the entire building. And you can see the atrium roof, which is operable. So on a normal day, you want to let hot air out, we open it. So you can see the air going out. And then if it rains, then it closes and becomes, it seals the whole building from getting wet. And there you can see the roof garden, the mid-level roof garden just below it. We have bridges linking the 2 blocks. And so here's the bridge that links the 2 blocks. Here's the bridge seen from the inside. And at the bottom is the main entrance to the building. Then, well, that's the bridge. And another experimental device we adopted in this project is the diagonal light shaft. Most light shafts are vertical. Here, I cut a diagonal shaft that goes all the way down to the bottom of the site, so that when people walk down the street, they can look up and see the building, and people inside the floor can look down and see the street. And so this is looking down into street level. And that's that diagonal shaft doesn't cover the entire flight. So it's that little red rectangle, and that's in which the light shaft. On the right-hand side is the daylight analysis entering the building. It's quite a deep plan, and maybe I could have done a narrower plan. But the building shape and the form and the overall configuration was given by the master planner for the site, who is Zaha Hadid. And so, you know, we just optimize and maximize the floor area. Here's the view up from the ground floor, looking up to the skylight at the top. You can see the skylight, and you can see the floors in between. At the bottom of the ground floor, we have what we call an Ecocell, which brings water into the lower parts of the building. So this is what Ecocell looks like. And at the bottom, we have the water tank. Ideally, we could have a bioswale there to bring water back into the ground. So that, you know, left-hand side is the cross section. And there it is on the ground floor, and this is the ground floor plan. And this is the view of the building from a distance. You can see the ramp planting. On the far left is a tower done by famous Japanese architect Kisho Kurokawa, who's also the architect for the KLIA. So now, connectivity and nexus is one of the ecological attributes. In nature, everything's connected, and that whether overtly or inadvertently or inexplicitly, and we should try and enhance this connectivity. What human beings do is that when we enter a site, we chop it up, we fragment it like cutting a cow into a burger, and the connectivity in the habitats is lost, and we fill in we fragment the land with impervious surfaces, with fences and with buildings. And so one of the things we need to do with any city, with any building, is try to enhance its connectivity. So this is a competition scheme that we did before the Solaris building. This was done in 1999, 2001. The Solaris building was in 2008. So at that time, we was already thinking about the ramp vegetation idea. So the idea of the vegetation goes all the way up the building. And that's how we treat competition. The competitions are for us research projects where we try and advance ideas. And this is the plan showing the continuity of the vegetation going all the way up. And the idea was that whenever the ramp, the vegetated ramp reaches the same level of the roof of the adjoining building, we bridge across and to the roof, and we green the roof so that in this way, the building becomes the catalyst to make the city green. Now, one of the properties is biodiversity. So whenever we design, we start to look at the biodiversity of location. You can see that in the this is indicative histogram, that the highest level of biodiversity is really around the equator. You know, between 0 to 10, 15 degrees. And of course, in certain parts, you know, between 30, 40 is fairly biodiverse. And so we had Kuala Lumpur as in latitude 2.9 degrees, and it's a very high diverse locality. So we started to develop ways we can enhance the biodiversity, and this is what we call something that we have developed with ecologists, the Biodiversity Matrix. Let me explain what this is. The first thing we do when we design any building, any project, any development, any master plan, is to create habitats within location, within that development. It can be on the ground, it can be underground, it can be on the walls, it can be the sky courts, and can be on the roofs. So creating habitats is very important. So these are some habitats in this project in Putrajaya. And the project is really two almost symmetrical buildings, which is bifurcated by the access to the Millennium Monument. And here it is. It was completed about 3 years ago, and you can see the habitats on the facade and the sky court. This was before the vegetation is fully completed, fully grown, and there's vegetation on the ground. The site is determined by two main axes. The first one is the boulevard leading to the Prime Minister's office. And the second one is the axis from the square, the Dataran Merdeka, down to the waterfront, which is where the monument is. And so with these as the determined factors, we started to shape the building. And that you can see that the axis down to the monument slices the site into two. And then, of course, just next to it is the new Putrajaya building designed by Philip Cox. And you can see the Prime Minister's building office along the boulevard. This is the axis. So the axis cuts the site. And if we were to respect the axis, then we have to not build across and build on top of it. And you can see at the far end is the monument, here's the monument, which is also designed by us, but about 8 years earlier. And that's the monument. That's the Ministry of Finance building seen from the back. And that's the monument in its axis to the Dataran Wawasan. Now, the space between the buildings, we created a pleasurable zone for people can sit, and we have vegetation on this area. Again, the habitats are in this location. And so these are the habitats we created in the development. You can see there's a plan, and you can see the red color, which shows the habitats. And then the first thing we did after with this is to choose to select this, what fauna that we want to bring back to the location, because the site was just ravaged, it was just cleared and just red earth, and we wanted and cleared of any living life except the microbes in the ground. And so with this plan, because of the shape of the site, we had two almost symmetrical buildings with the promenade in between. Each of them have their own drop-offs and an atrium between. So the first thing we did was to create the habitats. Next is to identify the species of fauna we want to bring back into the project, which is not hazardous to the locality, to the people in the locality. And after that, we try and look for the flora that will attract the fauna. The fauna will not just come. We need to have flora that attracts the fauna. And then from there, we look at the interaction between the habitats, the flora, and the fauna, and that becomes the basis for designing the habitats and the landscape areas. So this is what we call the biodiversity matrix, and this is what makes the project ecological. And this is what that takes ecological green design to the next level. Now this was done as a collaboration between ourselves, the ecologist, and the landscape architect. Now, this interesting bit of facade, we wanted to create a faceted facade as a high-end looking facade, like a diamond, like a gem in the locality. And so that's hence its faceted shape. But we wanted to break up the facet, so we slice it, we cut voids in the slices and take sky cords in between. And in between the outer plane and the outer skin and inner skin is a walkway for servicing. But you can see that the panels are not butt jointed. They actually have an air gap so that this becomes even like a flue for the air that flows through and cools the facade. Here it is. You can see the slicing of the facade and the sky cords. Now the pattern is what we call is a songket pattern to express the Malay culture in the songket fabric as a reminiscent of the songket fabric. We could do more, but we just took the pattern as the basis for reflecting the culture of the country. So here it is, and then on the right-hand side is the west facade. We shaped the west facade to keep out the western front, so it's not exactly flat. And then and so this is the entire west facade, which is actually quite an interesting facade. And then you can stand at the sky course and look out and see the highway on the other side of the river. Now, the energy index is about 136.16 kilowatt hours per square meter per annum, whereas the typical office building in Malaysia to use 210. So this is about 70% less energy. We could have done it more, we could have done more, but I think those are as far as we could get from the client. So again, here we brought the habitats all the way down to the ground, into the basement using what we call the Ecocell. And here it is, it goes down from the third floor vegetation, weaves its way down to the bottom and hit the basement to bring natural ventilation and bring water and daylight into the lower parts of the building. The vegetation idea, the Ecocell idea started maybe about 10 years earlier. This was a competition scheme for the Kowloon waterfront. It was a controversial scheme, and the controversy is a separate story altogether. But anyway, I think we got honorary mention and not the first prize. But the idea of the Ecocell started in this building. The podium, we cut voids going all the way down to the basement. And the voids actually does a number of things. It brings vertical integration into the lower parts, opportunities for rainwater harvesting, natural ventilation, daylight penetration. And at the bottom, we could have a bioswale or an eco machine, the ones that John Todd invented. And so this is the function of the Ecocell. Now then, how do we address this with the vertical building? How do we create habitats within the vertical building? So early on, the principle was to link everything together horizontally to create an ecological nexus. And people sometimes ask me, well, how do you make Kuala Lumpur green? And I said, the first thing you need to do is to create more green areas and connect them, because then it creates an ecosystem within the city. And so that was the idea. But when you hit the base of the building, you should try and bring the vegetation all the way up. So that's the idea, was that we should then extend the vegetation vertically into the sky. So this is a building that we are under construction now, which is, we have a green wall as a continuous planting going up. And then when it hits certain levels of the building, we have a sky court. And these are spaces for respite for the users. And then we start by looking at the green areas within the vicinity of the site, which is that red dot. And then from there, we look at the closer view of the green areas. And from there, it gives us clues on what species, what faunal species want to bring back to the site and what floral species. So looking back into this image of habitats, these are different habitats for this project. We have a green wall, which is vertical. We have green sky courts. We have a green roof and green mid-level areas. So the approach was to bring back birds and invertebrates into the site. The vertebrates are sort of, species that have no bones. So for the lower floors, we designed it for butterflies and dragonflies, and we choose a species that will attract them. And then for the middle areas, we have spaces for songbirds, and the top area would be a space for migratory birds that flows across the site. But it's important to have water feature because water attracts birds to the different zones. So this is the biodiversity matrix for the project. And so you would use that as and that's the top of the building with the horizon pool. And this was the basis in which we designed the landscaping and the planter boxes in the building. Now, next is the provision of ecosystem services. I'm sorry, I doubled the word provision there. Ecosystem services is something that the ecologists, conclude around year 2000. There's a list of things that nature does for us without any human intervention. Now, this is very important because, the more we cut nature, the way we, make the nature more and more homogeneously abiotic, the more we lose the potential for ecosystem services. So these are the things that nature does without any human intervention. So if you look at the top left-hand corner, there's the provision of oxygen. Nature, through photosynthesis, produces oxygen. And nature also absorbs, sequesters pollution from the air. Now, we didn't ask nature to do this. Nature does it for us without any human intervention. And so you can see this, the importance of putting greenery in the city, importance of making our greenery, our city as biotic as possible, importance of redesigning our city and changing our city so that we have nature to try and balance the pollution that we emit into the air, and to create oxygen to give us a healthy environment. And so the idea occurred to me was that this is too big a task for us to do. We can never replicate what nature can do with photosynthesis. It's a huge effort. We can never replicate the intervention, the sequestering of contaminants in the air. And so the idea was then to create habitats woven in close proximity to urban areas. I call this nature augmentation. We use nature to augment the capability of locality to provide the ecosystem services. Now, this is extremely important because once we don't have this and we're not able to do it, then our cities become contaminated areas, becomes unhealthy areas for people, and very soon won't be any vegetation left on the planet at the rate we are building and changing and cultivating the land for all sorts of purposes. So the idea then was to weave, the green corridors and the green areas and the built-up areas in a sort of like a clasp hand concept. And so you can see the ecological fingers that stick out into the sea, and the others is the ecological corridors that that weaves into the inland, into the inland, into the green air, into its green context. This is a project master plan we did at the island of the Reunion, which is east of Madagascar, and it's a French territory. So the idea was that we collect all the species at the waterfront because the buildings have to be set back a certain feet from level distance from the waterfront. And then we bring it through a series of ecological fingers. And then the urban fingers then goes all the way down towards the waterfront. So you can see that, this is how, by giving the green fingers next to the urban areas, it provides then, the ecosystem services by being so close. Otherwise, you'd be so far apart, just like Hyde Park and the rest of London, or Regent's Park. And even though these are very large parks, they're so far away from, Wandsworth or Palsden that, you virtually cannot, is non-effective. But here is cheek by jowl with the urban areas right next to it. And we thought this would be about 30 meters would be more effective, and the green fingers could be 20, and so forth. And then the edges should be serrated. It should not be just pristine, because species like to have serrated edges because they can hide, they can breed, they can, they're less exposed, they're protected. So now back to this diagram again that I showed earlier on. Infrastructure then become a critical issue in our design. And one thing that if I were to leave an idea in your head, that it's better to design for infrastructure first, and then the green buildings can come later. Now, this is a little schematic diagram of what the existing city is. You have, you have the infrastructure, and you have the triangles are all the buildings. And what architects do is to design green buildings. So they put little green buildings all over the place. But this is ineffective if your infrastructure is not green. Now that's very important to recognize this. Because if you have a building where the water comes from the ground, from ground source, or the energy comes from burning coal, and so forth. And so what it means is that we should start with the green infrastructure, not with the green building, with the green infrastructure. Then anything else we add to it can become potentially greener. And so this is a very important idea that green architecture is not designing green buildings alone, but it is designing the green infrastructure. That is what we should start with. This is the master plan we did in Bangalore in India. There's the forest reserve on the west side of the site. And the first thing we did was to try and link all the vegetation together into a master plan, into a spine. And then we stretch the spine across the site. That's the ecological fingers. And so that is the scheme, so that by bringing it right to the edge of the site, hopefully it would extend to the adjoining site and to other sites. That's difficult to control. It's up to the authorities to insist on that. But that's a start. Here's the water infrastructure where all buildings have a water system that they're connected. And then here's the energy systems, the road energy systems. And for hydrology, you should try and, so these, the white squares show the detention ponds where the water is retained on the site, the surface water. And we should try and close the loop as much as we can within the built system. And if it discharges the outside, then we should go back to the ground and to recharge the groundwater. So on the right-hand side are different means of doing this, whether through infiltration planting, permanent permeable planting, and paving in green gardens, infiltration bioswale, through a rain garden, or through just the stormwater wetland areas. That's very important because if you don't, then the water goes to the drains and into the sea. It's gone forever, we can't use it. So here it is. For the black wastewater, we propose that we use construct the wetland, so that construct wetlands, the gray black water can flow from one pond to another pond, and by the time it reaches the bottom, it is almost potable. And so, if in a nutshell, this is a schematic concept of how we could bring all these 4 infrastructures into a whole. It's not perfect, but we're still working on this. Now, nature ecosystems respond to climate. Different parts of the earth have different ecosystems, and the climate determines what sort of ecosystems we can have, determines what sort of fauna and flora species. So the responsiveness to climate is very important. So these are different climates of the world, and this in many ways reflects the ecology of the locality. Now, with this quick summary of the different ways of reducing energy, and so if you look at the graph, you start with passive mode. That means, improve energy conditions without any mechanical electrical systems. Number 2, the next stage is mixed mode, and then full mode as smart systems, and finally productive mode, which is renewable source of energy. For temperate climates, this is what the comfort profile looks like here. The engineers insist that we have a consistent temperature, humidity, and air change throughout the whole year. So this is the red color line. And the blue shows the comfort conditions in winter, in which it's cold, and in the summer it's hot. Now, by using passive mode, using bioclimatic design, we can improve the comfort conditions without use of any mechanical electrical systems. But you can see that it's a long way off from the red line. You can never replace mechanical systems, high energy systems by passive mode. We can improve it a little bit, but not that much. The next is to use mixed mode. Mixed mode means some mechanical electrical systems, just like, for instance, passageways can have ceiling fans instead of air conditioned. Toilets can use ceiling fans, and so forth. And so this is mixed mode, some mechanical electrical systems. Then this is mixed mode. This is mixed mode, and then here is like what I call environmental mode over the mid-seasons. Then the next would be productive mode. Productive mode, where you generate your own energy through using renewable sources of energy. And now here's an example of a project in London, in a temperate zone. In a temperate zone, you have two opposing seasons. You have a very cold winter and a hot summer. Then in between, you have mid-seasons like spring and autumn, which are very nice seasons. So the idea was to try and reduce the need for air conditioning in the summer and the need for heating winter by extending the mid-season. By extending mid-season through natural ventilation, reduces the period for cooling and heating during the summer and winter months. Now, the way to do this is to use use a mixed mode system. So this was the design for the extension of the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. And here we created a flue on the facade that sucks up the air from the lower 3 floors, so that this reduces the heating and cooling in the summer and winter months. And this can only work effectively in a temperate zone because of the dry bulb temperature between the inside and the outside. That there's a buoyancy between inside and outside, so that in the mid-season, when you open the valve at the top of the building, it sucks the air out. Whereas in the tropics, it doesn't work because the temperature in the shade and from the outside and the inside is almost too similar for this to work. And so that's the valve at the bottom of the building. That's the valve at the top of the building. And this is the mixed mode scene, the flue seen from the side of the building. But we did the same thing for a project in Beijing, which is latitude 39 degrees north. And it's in the district of Xiong'an, which is where the new capital city will be. And it's the renovation of the existing building. So what we've done is that we cut voids at the ground floor. And we did the same thing to create natural ventilation and extending the mid-seasons. And you can see in the bottom left, the voids cut into the floor to create an atrium, a continuous wind flow to the roof. And on the far right is the simulation of the wind flow. Now in Kuala Lumpur, what happens is that we're in the tropics, so the temperature is almost consistent throughout the whole year. There'll be slight variations. And so what we try to do is to shape the building to try and reduce the need for cooling for the building. Now on the left-hand side is a diagram of different core positions. You can either have it in the central core in the upper row, or you have it at the edges, at the ends. And you can have it on one end, as you can see in the 3rd row, and at the other end on the 4th row. Now, this was the Menara Bow study. You can see we put the core on the east side and the west side as buffers between the outside and the inside. Because the sun, as you can see in the sun path, is 1/3 of the days to the east, the other 1/3 is on the top, the other 1/3 is on the approximately on the west side. And studies then show in this diagram on the left that the core on the east and west side has the lowest energy consumption. And so this is one way to, by configuring the building, it reduces the energy consumption of the building. Now this is an idea that I had, which is what I call a canopy building. I call this an umbrella building, which is, my golden chalice, if you like, of a bioclimatic building. And that the umbrella is very cybernetic. If it rains on one side, you shift it to one side. If the sun's on the other side, you angle it instantaneously, and the wind's on the other side. If you don't want the wind, you just angle it and drop it a little bit. And so I call this an umbrella building. And we need to find ways in which you can do this in the tropics. Of course, I've done, as you can see, Solaris building, I have automated the louvers. But ideally, the whole canopy itself should be movable if we can. So this was a design for a station. And this was our entry for the University of Malaya campus master plan. We got first prize for this competition, but somehow they didn't come back to us to design it. I think the in-house architecture faculty wanted to do it, keep it to themselves, I suppose. Anyway, that's the hub. In created suggested the hub should have again a canopy over it with fritted glass, just like the one we use for Putrajaya 2C5. And so this was the canopy over the university hub. Here's the detail of the canopy. Here's a design for a canopy over a station in Beijing, in the Xiong'an district. And here's the top view of the canopy. And this is the continuous vegetation through the canopy. And this is the roof house in Ampang with a louvered canopy that lets in the morning sun, keep out the afternoon sun, and keep out the evening sun, keep out the midday sun and the evening sun. And there are voids to let the swimming pool become an evaporative cooling device through the building. Here's the louvers over the swimming pool area with a viewing canopy, viewing platform. And this is the plan of the building. You can see that you have natural ventilation, north, south, east, and west. It's all openable. So the outside walls are glass walls that you can adjust to control the ventilation coming in. And so building then becomes, if you like a living valve. It's a passageway through the building. Of course, this was done back in 1986. That's nearly about 30 years ago. And that, okay, and this is the through passage through it. The building uses about 42 kilowatts per square meter per annum. And for the water, this is the canopy for the Idaman residence, which is near the KLCC area. And here's the idea for a building where we use embedded glass with embedded photovoltaics. In principle, in the tropics, in Kuala Lumpur, for a building to be energy efficient, at least 60% of the floor area should be photovoltaics. And use of cycling materials, we try and close the loop as much as possible. Here's the building we designed in Germany, where the idea again was to bring vegetation all the way up to the top, and a tower, and materials had to be recycled, where the waste materials go to a recycling plant in the city, and then after its use is recycled again. These are different stages of recycling, from extraction from the planet down to materials processing, product manufacture, and finally end use where it's recycled. And that's the master plan for the site. And homeostasis, where there's a feedback that we should monitor the ecosystems in the Earth. The idea was to use, satellite systems and sensors throughout the whole planet to recycle the Earth, to monitor the state of the planet. And succession, I'm still working on this, is that ecosystems go through a stage of succession, and I still have to find the solutions for this. And this is my diagram of what the eco-city could look like, Ecotopia, with the vegetated roofs, with the roof gardens, with the green bridges and eco bridges, the Ecocells. These are two aspects I haven't fully worked out yet, which is this ecosystem biosis and food production. And this is a diagram that drives our work that I mentioned. Now, here's the question. I'm going to end in a minute. What happens if we get everything right? We are able to ecologically, get the nature, get the water system, get the structures and everything right. What happens if we as human beings don't behave ourselves? So that's the last one, human beings. So then if we waste materials, we build all sorts of things, we waste energy. So then ecological future is not just about architects designing. It's not just about creating eco-cities. It depends on people. If the people do not behave properly, do not live an ecological life, we continue to eat red meat and so forth, and then what's the point of designing green buildings if the people use it are not green? And so this is my final message to all of you, that if we were to have a sustainable future, it's not just architects design green buildings, but it's people making themselves an green lifestyle. That's the, thank you.
Thank you, Dato Ken. Um, it was a very wonderful presentation. Even though at the beginning there were some hiccups with our connection, I'm glad that they sorted out. uh, there are questions in the question and answer chat box. Not chat box, the question and answer box. If you do have question and answers, questions, please do type it in the question and answer button below your Zoom button, yeah, below your Zoom screen. Um, just to summarize, it's a really amazing presentation. I think the integration of nature, human society, water structures, and energy systems is something that is integral to all the works that Ken has done. And I think the ending was very poignant as well, where even though you have designed the best buildings, the best ecological systems, but if behavior of the human and society is not in line with all this, it is for naught, as that is the most important factor in determining the performance of all these projects, I would assume. And I think if you don't mind, can we proceed straight to the questions? I think there are a lot of questions in our question box. I will just start with the first one. Um, having a lot of green, it's anonymous. Having a lot of green plants and landscape requires a lot of maintenance. How did you manage to convince the developers to choose green over maintenance cost?
Well, getting the developer to put green in buildings has at the beginning been a real issue for me. By the way, when you look at my image, you can see the daylight coming in from my window. So once that happens, I know it's 6 o'clock. that's my sundial.
Natural clock.
Yeah, natural clock. So that is an issue. But to convince them, it is by I call this the gardener index. When I finish a building, I put greenery in it. I tell them this is a 2-gardener building, or this is a 1-gardener building, or this is a 4-gardener building.
Right.
Now, gardeners' salaries are not very expensive. Neither is the replacement of the field and vegetation. So it's not an awful lot of money. I just tell them, I estimate you need 2 gardeners, and gardeners couldn't be more than 1,500 a month, and 2 of them would be about 3,000. The field could be more than 500 or whatever. So it is not that expensive.
Right.
But like everything else, do you have a garden in your house? If you have a garden in the house, you have to look after it. You cannot have a garden and not look after it. Just like you have a car, you have to wash it and keep it clean and keep it serviceable. Otherwise, don't have a car. Otherwise, don't have a garden. So these are things that you have to consider. I just want to mention something because it's very important.
Right.
Now, when I started on my doctorate back in 1971, My topic was given to me by my Professor John, my senior lecturer. I had to learn ecology. I had to go to the Department of Environmental Biology. Cambridge, it was a little bit snooty. They don't call it ecology because I think it's a word the Americans invented or somebody else invented. They call it environmental biology. So I had to learn environmental biology to listen to lectures.
Okay.
Now, the point is this: how many of you out there understand ecology? I've given up on my generation of architects because all of my generation of architects are not brought up in ecology. So to ask my generation of architects to make ecology is like, it's a long haul. But the future is with new students, and you have to learn ecology. Then it got to be, how many schools of architecture teach ecology to the students? Maybe one in a thousand, maybe, or one in a few hundred. And so if the future is with the student, with the youth, and you don't learn ecology, then there's not much hope for all of us. Now, what it means is that you have to change the curriculum of the schools of architecture. So, for instance, when you teach materials, schools of architecture teach you how it looks, how it weathers, how it's joined, and so forth.
Right.
But they have to teach the flow of materials from the time you extract it from the ground, processing it, fabricate it to the building, the impact around this flow, amount of energy and the carbon is used. Now,
Correct.
that is the ecological concept of materials. But how many people teach that? Not many schools of architecture teach that. But if you're aware of this, then it's important to change the use of materials. Then you saw my diagram
Yes.
of the mixed mode and the fluid mode and so forth. In some ways, we have become almost like M&E engineers. Now I finished my doctorate in 1974, and I started business in 75, 76. Another time you talk to people about ecological design, they think you're crazy. Back in 1976, it's not until 15 years later, around the 90s, that people jump up and say, oh, we have to do something about it. And then engineers got into sustainability design. And then it became very easy for architects. I said, I just design the way we've been doing. Let the engineers, make our building sustainable. The other day I was in Holland and was by the waterfront and those piers sticking out. And then when you look across the piers, the client said to me, oh, over there, a building designed by Zaha Hadid. Is this really? That's a wonderful building. I think Zaha's a terrific designer, terrific form maker as well, very innovative, like Ram Koolhaas. And then he said, but they are super green buildings. I said, really? They say that there's LEED platinum. But I said, those are the same designs that Zaha has been doing for 20, 30, 20 years, 30 years. So, but it's super green. So what it means is that you can still design a building any way you want, get an engineer to stuff it with mechanical systems to
Right.
get accreditation for LEED and the green mark or whatever it is. And you just carry on business as usual. But that's not the way to do green architecture. That is not the way. You have to relook on how to make it into a constructed ecosystem. So that is important. So I just
Tot-
want to get this message through.
Totally agree with you, Dato Ken. I think there are many ways to skin a cat, and I think we need to look at the best way, and passive design, green ecology, putting in as many architectural solutions rather than than technology solutions. Yeah, and this uh, just to mention, I think there is a shift in education. There are a lot of universities who are actually looking into things like from cradle to cradle in terms of materials and
Okay.
emphasis on green. So good. I think I'm involved in one of them, University Malaya. Maybe one day I can show you the things that they are doing, the students.
Good.
Anyway, we move on to another question.
Yeah.
Uh, This is also from an anonymous attendee. I think they are shy to put their name in.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Architect Ken. Are there any proven success stories of habitat ecosystem creation? Can you share uh, on any of the projects which has, if any? Thank you. I think
Well,
he's asking specifically of the success of this habitat ecosystem creation. I mean, like the whole.
yeah. Well, we're doing post occupancy evaluation or post building evaluation. The trouble is that nobody wants to pay for it. Owners and developers are so stingy that they said, it's not important. Just don't let the idiot architect Ken who wants to do it. And so I have to depend on universities to do it for me. And so back in the 80s, I couldn't get any engineering advice. I had to use people from the university to work with me. And in those days, we don't talk about embodied carbon, talk about embodied energy. And Nigel Howard from the Building Research Establishment worked with me and measured some of our buildings.
Right.
But now I am trying to do a post-occupancy evaluation of Solaris building of its biodiversity. And I'm doing that with a lady from University of Utrecht in Holland, and with Dr. Anuj Jain from Singapore. And so they will start sometime in January this year to evaluate the effectiveness of biodiversity enhancement. And it's like anything else, you have to do post-building occupancy and post-building completion evaluation. And luckily, the lady from Utrecht is doing it from what she gets from the university. It's part of a university project. And so I don't have to find money for it. And that's what I'm doing. Now, energy is much easier to measure. You look at the meters and energy
Ken,
consumption.
which building has got the best review for post occupancy? Out of curiosity, among the previous buildings that you have done.
Um, well, the National Library in Singapore receives a very high level of user satisfaction. But you're never quite sure whether people are exactly telling the truth because they worry about repercussions. But it's got a very high level of user happiness.
I see. Yeah, it's a wonderful building. But I
Well,
think I doubt there's any need to lie to
I don't
on
know.
your post occupancy survey.
But well, the design of it was it's a tortuous process. But anyway, that's a story altogether. That's a different story altogether.
That's another story. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. Malaysian architect designing the National Library of Singapore. I think that's a big achievement as well.
I don't think
Okay.
they'll let me do that anymore.
Okay. Onwards to the next question. This is by our uh, past president, architect Zuhelmli An. Datuk Ken, can architecture shape human behavior?
Oh yes, definitely. Winston Churchill said, I'm sure you know what Winston Churchill said. He said, we shape our buildings and our buildings shape our lives. So now it's so important to make buildings that make people happy. Now I design green buildings because that's my lifetime agenda.
Right.
But green buildings isn't the only it's not the only factor in design. To me, the most important aspect of design is to make people happy, to give pleasure to their lives.
Right.
And if you're an architect, you design a building, and the people who use it, the people who visit it, say that it makes them immensely happy, immensely pleasurable. Then your whole purpose as an architect is fulfilled. Isn't that true? And I'm sure you all agree with that.
Right.
Besides that, of course, it has to be super green, has to meet criteria like, the marginless requirements, and has to be built properly, effectively within cost, within budget, high quality. It has to be poetic, has to be extremely beautiful, and it has to be super green, and finally, it must work. What's the point of doing a building that doesn't function? Then it's a useless piece of hardware. So it must work, it must meet criteria, it must be beautiful, it must be super green, and it must make people happy. And it just makes me sometimes when this happens, that people tell me, I did a house, for an Australian family in Johor. And when Bob Powell interviewed them, they said, "What do you think of the building?" And they said, "We think we're living in paradise." When Bob told me that, I said, "Wow, that really made my day." So, so making people happy is extremely important.
I think that is a wonderful cornerstone in your work as well, because there are schools of thought in sustainability that sustainability is as if it's opposed to uh, personal happiness. Linking sustainability with frugality,
Yeah,
but it's not, right. There are ways to live your life happily and design happily and make sure that people
absolutely.
yeah.
In New York, in Battery Park, there's a huge building done by Lisa Pelly. And, from the front, it's a beautiful space, actually. When you look down from the entrance, you see a huge hall, maybe about 8 stories, atrium. And they got the AIA award. They call it the Great American Space. But from the outside, it's the ugliest building I ever seen. So that means, green design can be functional, but it doesn't look nice. You know,
Okay. Move on. I'm trying to move as fast as possible through all the questions. There's a lot.
not too
Here's another
many.
one from another anonymous attendee. I
Mhm.
like the idea of biodiversity. However, has any of your clients ever expressed concern of potential pests being invited into the building space?
Oh, all the time. You have to, sometimes you have to be very careful. I did a building which is a 40-story building, and people who live in the penthouse, called me up and said, "We have a lot of mosquitoes." I thought, strange. How do mosquitoes get up to the 40 story? You wouldn't have an idea that mosquitoes cannot fly that high, maybe about, the most maybe about 4 stories or whatever, but 40 stories. So I said, well, I'll come and have a look. And I found out the mosquitoes went to the 4th story through the elevators. When the elevator reached the ground floor, they get into the elevator, reach the 40th floor, they come out into the space. And so that's how mosquitoes get to the 40th floor. So the way to solve that was to put mosquito, machines in the elevators so that, they stop mosquitoes, going upstairs. So these are some things we have to be concerned about.
Wow.
There are also insects and snakes and things like that. So you have to be very careful with some of these. The
Wow.
hazardous to human beings, you have to control them, you know.
Mosquitoes using the lift. Yeah, wonderful.
Um,
What Lim asked, what is the current strategy to manage flooding and rising water levels, i.e., global warming? Is there something we need to address?
well, flooding actually starts with drainage. And if you're not designing, if you didn't design the drainage properly, then water will flood or the areas will pond. And so you need to control these, in UK, they call it SUD, Sustainable Urban Drainage. So you have to design the water so that it goes back to the ground to recharge the groundwater rather than goes into the drains. Once it goes to the drains, it's gone. Because it goes to drains, it goes to river, it goes to the sea, the water is gone forever. Potable water is gone. But if it goes back to the ground, it recharge the groundwater, and that's what we need to do. And so what you need to do is to have an hydrologist to work with you and look into the hydrology of the site And every site has, if it's a hilly site, you have natural drainage channels. So you have to respect the natural drainage channels. Then sometimes the natural drainage channels flow the other way from adjoining sites flow into your site. So you have to find some ways to address that.
Right.
One way, the other way of doing it is to use detention ponds. Is use ponds just like Putrajaya. There are a lot of ponds that people think, oh, it must be very expensive to build those ponds. But actually, those ponds are detention ponds. The
Right.
water that from the roads and from the impervious surfaces flow into these ponds. And so these are the ways of controlling water. But very often, if you don't plan for this, no matter how careful you are, um, nature has its own way of doing things. And if there's excessive rainfall, then you have floods. So everything centers around what I call sustainable drainage. Design the drainage so that the water either is recycled or whether it's stored and treated for recycling within the building, or it goes to detention ponds. Or there are many ways. If you see my diagram, you can use what you call rain gardens. Little ditches that look like gardens when it doesn't rain. When it rains, the ditches fill up, and then it slowly filters back to the ground.
Right.
They're called rain gardens. And so, so these are some techniques you can use.
And also, some of your projects have bioswales. A lot of them have bioswales that
Yeah,
add to this as well.
yeah. Biospheres bring water back into the ground.
Um, uh, which segues, I think when you mention hydrologists, I think this segues into the next question very nicely. Lim Chi Tek asked, "Hi, Architect Ken. I see there are so many research works apart from your design that you have come up with. Do you engage all the specialists to work out and support you in the design, or are they part of your team? Does your clients pay separate fees for all this work? Thank you."
Well, the last question is the most important one because nobody pays me a single sausage for doing what I do. It's terrible. It's a miserable life actually as an architect, and I do everything myself. In the 90s, in the 70s to 90s, absolutely no help. I have to beg my friends in the university to do studies for me, as part of the academic work. As I said, it wasn't until the 90s that we got more engineering support from the community. But even till today, we do a lot of research. And every project for us becomes an opportunity for research. Not always you have to do it on the run because it's not
Right.
able to do it very thoroughly. And I'm constantly studying and doing research myself. As you can see, a lot of white hair. And to be frank with you, I haven't been in business since 1976, and that's 45 years ago. And
Wow.
for 45 years, I've never taken a day leave until yesterday. Yesterday,
Wow.
I had creaking bones, and I couldn't get out of the bed, and so for the first time for the 6 years, I, I, I didn't come to the office. Everyone was still fighting like hell, but here I am. I'm talking to you, and
Yeah, yeah. You
around.
look good, Ken.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
you have to have two things. You have to be happy and have a pure heart.
Great advice. Uh, but I think the question was asking, is this team of support in-house, or like the people that advise you, the hydrologists or even the ecologists, is it in-house or is it an external party?
um, well, let's say it's 80% external and 20% internal because
Right.
we have a lot of smart people in the office, and we have a lot of consultants who give us a lot of good advice. But obviously, they have to be paid, and
Correct.
the money for it is extremely difficult. So, for those of you who are students, think again whether you want to be an architect. because when I speak at schools of architecture, I drive the faculty crazy by saying that, are you sure you want to be an architect? An architect is a tough life for half a dozen reasons. First of all, it's cash flow driven. Like everything else, you got to do the work first, then you claim for fees, and sometimes you don't get paid. But if you run a restaurant, you finish, people say you got to pay the bill before you walk out of the restaurant.
Yeah, yeah.
So we are cash flow driven. So that's very, very stressful. The secondly, we are delivery intensive. If you have a number of projects, every day there's something you have to deliver on that project, which you don't deliver on time, whether it's a planning approval, or whether it's a tender call, or whether it's a report, whether it's a reply to something else. People get frightfully annoyed with you. So it's delivery intensive, the second factor. The third is that you're dealing with people. It's a people business. So people fight within the office. You have problems with consultants, sometimes with a client who thinks he knows a lot of things better than you here, and he wants to be the architect. So these are the third factor. And finally, you're doing multiple business functions. Now, what I mean by multiple business functions, let's say if you're in the car business, the person who sells the car does the marketing plan, does not do the management, does not do the finance, does not do the production. Whereas you as an architect, you have to produce the product, you have to sell it, you have to get the product, you have to manage your office, and you manage the finance.
Correct.
And so it is, all these reasons make life as an architect very stressful. So do you want to be an architect? Is it worth being an architect? So now, if you want to be an architect, you must have a real passion for it. You must do it because you love being an architect. You like the art and craft of being an architect. But if you don't have the art, you don't love it, why waste your time?
Correct.
Why waste your time? Why waste your effort? Don't treat an architect like architecture like a business. Then you've lost, everything. Now, it is very stressful for me because I control the design. We have about 40, 50 people in the office, and no design leaves the office without my input, whether it is at the sketch design stage, design development stage, or the detailed design stage.
Right.
Now, if you want to control that, how many projects can you control? How many projects can you handle? So it's very stressful. Of course, it's much easier like the big office. I get 4 partners. I let so and so handle it. Let so and so handle it. So handle it. I just sit there, get the jobs, and collect the money.
Right.
But that makes it into a business.
Right.
That you're no longer an art and craft.
Yeah.
So that's something that you have to decide for yourself. If you want to keep architecture as an art and as a craft, then you have to lead the stressful life. And that is something that we have to accelerate.
I think that's golden advice. Actually, a lot of people give that same advice as well, because
Yeah.
we don't want the students to actually waste their time. After 3 years taking architecture, after 4 years, before the 5th year changing course and all that. So really a waste.
Yeah.
But I think it's great that you are talking to architecture schools, because in your work your passion really shines through, and it is true that there are
And
many various ways of practice, right?
need life again, I will be an architect. I'll be a quantity surveyor or something like that.
uh,
Something
uh,
out of
Ken, actually we are supposed to end at 6:30, but there are a few more questions. If you
interest.
may, I just finish off the questions. Is that okay?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, maybe more than a few. Uh,
Just one more.
okay, I have to select then. Uh, Hi, okay, this is from Muhammad Izzatul Azizi Romli. Um, he says, "Hi, architect Ken Yang. Your building designs are rich with natural ventilation. Do you have any data relating to natural ventilation buildings versus COVID-19, uh, such as in the National Library of Singapore?
Well,
Data." Mm,
you have to, you have to. there are certain criteria for air change per hour. So you have to find out what is the air change per hour and exceed it if you can, so that you get the required natural ventilation to your space. But very often, if the space is air conditioned, then the air change in the air conditioning is very important, and that the fresh air intake is sufficient not to have a stagnant air in the space. And that is something you need to be aware of.
Right. Thank you. With that final question, I would like officially to thank you, Dato Dr. Architect Ken Yeang, for gracing us with your presence and also sharing your extensive knowledge. Yeah, and I I I I got your message that you have published a new book as well. So I was just while you were getting disconnected just now, I did mention your book at one with nature, which was just recently published, right? So uh, I think everyone should check it out. It's
Well, I'll
in all the bookstores and
tell you
Amazon.
that it's, let me see if I can find a book somewhere.
Yeah, sure.
Uh,
In the meantime, please, all our attendees, for your CPD, please fill in your sign out code and sign in code, yeah? Or else the secretariat would not get your information. Yeah, there you go.
that's
At
the
one with nature.
but why I've spent a lot of effort designing it because it's 180 pages, and
Right.
every page is a double page spread. Okay, it's always a double page spread.
Nice.
And so it's a luxurious book. It's like, because architects don't really like to read, so I use sense of book that you can find pleasure, find pleasure, and just thumbing through it, and architects buy books because of the images. When they see an image they like, they say, I can use that image in one of my projects. But they buy the book just for the image, so that they can do a multi-million-dollar project or whatever. And so people buy books for the images.
Right.
And this book, believe it or not, took me 3 years
Wow.
to get it
Yeah.
up because, I had a lot of problems with my publisher, took me about, it's supposed to be out by November. It wasn't until, you know, September.
I see it's out on Amazon as well, so it's
So
I think
it's a lot
can
of
order from there, I guess.
it.
Again, thank you so much, Architect Ken. And of course, for those who have asked questions, I think 11 other questions that do not have time to answer at length. Uh, my apologies. I wish that it could go on further, but we are already 6 minutes past.
Yeah.
And with that, I would like to just mention that please join in for the next DLS design lecture series on the 17th of November, where architect Azim Abdul Aziz will present his winning entry, yeah, in the recently announced Baku International Architecture Award. Stay tuned for that. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time. See
But
you around.
okay, you're a good boy.
Yes, thank you. For those who don't know, Ken was my tutor last time, so